Thanks for clicking on to the Saturday evening edition of Logan's European Outlook for the 7th of January. This is the current pressure pattern across Europe as of recording at 6:20 in the evening. We've got a deep area of low pressure just to the west of the British Isles in Northern Ireland and the Republic as well. Pressure into the mid 950s in millibars, so a pretty deep area of low pressure, but it's a very large area of low pressure, and a lot of the energy is fairly spread out across a very large area. So, albeit the central pressure is low, we aren't seeing anything exceptional from this area of low pressure. Well, we do have an area of high pressure over the eastern portion of Europe, and the current temperatures look like this here. We do have some very cold air indeed across eastern portions of the continent. The far east of the continent, really over Russia, is where you're seeing the bitterly cold air at the moment, as well as that across northern portions of Finland, Sweden, and Norway. Also, relatively mild across the British Isles, and of course, we do have milder air lifting north to the east of this area of low pressure. This is the current setup here, according to the latest GFS output overview, precipitation, cloud, temperature, and pressure chart. So there's that area of high pressure centered over the far west of Russia. Essentially, this is acting like a little bit of a wall, holding back the cold air from sliding westwards over the next couple of days. There's that area of low pressure, and as we go through the next few days, what we're going to see is we're going to have this little tug of war between the Atlantic trying to push east, coming up against the resistance of this high over the eastern portion of the continent. So this is why this area of low pressure never really progresses any to the east. It really just eventually gets deflected to the north. But the center of that low gets fairly close to the British Isles, and like I say, for a center down to 952 millibars, you would almost look at that and go, heck, you would think that would be producing severe storm force winds across the northwest of the British Isles. Yes, it's going to be windy. We are going to see gales. We're going to see 50, 60, 70 mile per hour winds through the Minch along the west coast and exposure and whatnot. We do have wind and various precipitation depending on the temperature profile, elevation, and whatnot, but nothing extreme because it is a very large area of low pressure that is encompassing hundreds of miles, and therefore when you spread the energy out, you don't have the same potency in terms of the wind generated by these systems. So it's a messy picture as we progress through the second half of this weekend and then on into the early portion of next week. What we've got a new system here showing up well out over the central portion of the North Atlantic. That is the feature that will eventually replace this area of low pressure, and we will see renewed wind and rain and whatnot as we progress through next week here. So this area of low pressure is actually pulling some fairly cold air off Scandinavia. It's wrapping around this large wind field, of course, as it rotates all the way around out over the North Atlantic and then comes back in on the southern flank of this area of low pressure. What we're going to see is we're going to see a little bit of a chillier airflow coming in from the west, and therefore we have temperatures near average, I think, over the British Isles through Sunday and the Monday, and really you lose a lot of the cold air associated with this feature as the air travels across relatively warmer than normal sea surface temperatures. All the while, we're continuing to see the pressure drop over the western portion of Russia. Temperatures are going to continue to drop in response to this height rise at the surface. And then, as I say, this area of low pressure eventually kind of starts to fill as it lifts northwards. So it's got nowhere to go, of course, with that area of high pressure over the continent. And you can see it heading northwards. Then the next feature comes in. We do have the development of a new low. This main centre never really kind of reaches the UK, but what happens is we have the development of a new feature And in between, what we're going to see is we're going to see a fairly significant, pressure temperature difference actually across the southwest. We could see temperatures close to 15 Celsius on Tuesday afternoon, while we could see temperatures struggling to get much out of the single figures, mid single figures actually at that, and heavy snowfall above 2 to 3, 400 meters above sea level. So a fairly messy mixed picture as we progress through Tuesday. You notice here that area of high pressure now at 1052 millibars. So we've got a fairly significant area of cold high pressure over western portions of Russia at this stage here. All the while we've got frontal systems trying to move in from the west here. So as we play through, you can see here what happens. That feature, the main band pushes through. Then we've got the pressure dropping with this next area of low pressure moving in during the middle portion of the week. That too could enhance gales, even severe gale force winds for this time frame, the middle portion of the week. Then the next feature comes in. So you get the overall idea. We continue to see this Atlantic driven pattern. But of course, as these areas of low pressure move in, we see these rises in temperature, then a fall in temperature, and we get this up and down regime here. In between areas of low pressure, clear skies, lighter winds, we see colder conditions develop, especially during the overnight period. And then it's really as we start to progress towards next weekend and beyond, we are seeing the models indicating that we have a little bit of a pressure build up here over the North Atlantic. So therefore, we don't shut down the Atlantic, but what we do is we start to change the track in which these areas of low pressure come in from. And some of these lows are indicating, from a Greenland, Iceland position, and then dropping south over the British Isles. So therefore, you would start to expect to see colder air coming in and the increased chance of seeing wintry precipitation and even northerly winds coming back in once again. As you can see here, this area of high pressure over the Azores extending almost up towards Greenland. You've got an area of low pressure centered to the east of the UK. So, of course, this would indicate that we would start to see northerly winds developing here across the UK for Tuesday the 17th. Now, this is a long way out, but this is going along with the ideas of a turn to colder during the second half of the month here. And I am becoming a little bit more confident that this scenario will take place, that we start to see areas of low pressure come in from a more north to northwesterly direction, and therefore we're transporting colder air with these lows into the UK. So, like I say, it's a step down process to a colder pattern as opposed to a bona fide cold pattern, a locked in, negative NAO, negative AO type pattern. I'm not saying that that's going to be the case, but I just think it remains unsettled. But there is shifts in the overall pattern that we'll see colder conditions starting to develop, I think, as we go through the second half of the month. Now, this is off the GFS ensemble, looking down over the pole. So this is the ensemble for the 500 millibar geopotential heights. Now, notice what happens is we've got multiple areas of low pressure across the northern hemisphere, and as we play through the loop here, you can see these areas of low pressure kind of cycling around, like almost on an axis, so to speak. So as I play through it, there's that big area of low pressure that's close to the British Isles currently. You see these areas of low pressure kind of cycling around, and of course that is having some influence up the way, up through the atmosphere towards the stratosphere. The modelling is seeing a significant deceleration of winds within the 10 millibar level as we progress towards this time frame. And it's interesting. One thing I find very interesting about this is the you start to lose the individual areas of low pressure. What happens is we start to see a bit of a height rise, a build up of pressure within the higher levels of the northern hemisphere. So we're starting to see the build up of pressure up into the Arctic region. And what that's doing is it's a twofold thing. We're starting to see the cold air that's over the northern portion of Siberia getting forced south over the continent of Asia. So therefore, we're going to see the temperatures dropping further south over China, over Mongolia, and even up towards over towards Japan and whatnot. We're going to start to see the temperatures coming down. It has been pretty cold. It has been very snowy in places like Japan, and I think what's going to happen is this rise in pressure is becoming interesting. We're going to start to see the westerlies throughout the northern hemisphere start to slow down and the pattern become more buckled. As we start to see the buildup of pressure, we're then rerouting the jet stream either south or north, and therefore we're not getting that straight west uniform um, zonal flow of the Atlantic. So the models are definitely seeing this shift, this change in the overall pattern as we progress between the 15th and the 20th of January. And this, by the way, has got no real implications in terms of the stratosphere. I say that it is having influence, I believe, but the influence of any kind of stratospheric warming, that then doesn't have much of an impact until we reach the very end of the month and begin the month of February. So what's going on now is having influence on the stratosphere, but what happens within the stratosphere, the response to that doesn't come until later down the road. Does that make sense? I kind of hope that I'm trying to make it as clear as possible. So it's very important what we're seeing at the moment taking place, the evolution of this shift, and then the response that has on the stratosphere, and then what happens within the stratosphere, the response we see down through the column, through the 500 millibar level, and right down to the surface. That is all what we're looking at the moment here. So I think it's an important time to stay tuned here to what's going on within the weather pattern here. You can see here as I play towards the very end of the loop, which is taking us out to the final 10 days of the month. Look at the difference. Look at the lack of blues in the chart, and look at the amount of these orange colours, especially over the North Atlantic, especially up towards the Arctic region. This is indicating, folks, that we have a much weaker jet stream, probably more displaced to the south. So therefore, we're introducing that cold pull, and we're seeing that over the next week or so over Siberia, over the far eastern portion of the planet, and then that is going to have a knock-on effect all the way around through North America, through the North Atlantic, through Europe, as we go through the next couple of weeks here. So a very, very significant change is possibly taking place that could have significant impacts later down the road here. So it's certainly all to play for when it comes to this winter pattern. We are in between, the cold that we've seen in December, and we're seeing that transition over the next week or so. Let's see what the response is from the atmosphere towards the end of the month and into February. Remember what my forecast said: cold December and below average December, then an average to slightly above average January. That looks as if it's starting to materialize as expected, with that kind of colder turn during the second half of the month. But I do believe, and I'll still stand by this, that I think February could be a very interesting month indeed. And I'm quite intrigued to see what's happening within the stratosphere as well. So there's a lot of things going on, and I certainly encourage you to stay tuned to my channel. If you don't already subscribe and you enjoy today's content, please do so. And I'm trying to show you the reasoning behind the type of pattern that we're seeing and what we may see further down the road. It's all right here on my channel. Do check out marfoganweather.com as well for more. And that is it for today. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday evening, and I'll hopefully see you again tomorrow with more. Bye for now.